Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive geopolitical earthquake, something the source material calls America's wrecking ball revolution. We're going to explore how the total breakdown of the post-World War II global order is doing a whole lot more than just changing high-level diplomacy. It's a complex, incredibly high-stakes shift that fundamentally alters the baseline safety of our daily lives. When global security fractures, it disrupts everything. It shakes up economic stability, it chokes off supply chains, and most alarmingly, it directly fuels a terrifying new era of global insecurity. We're going to break this all down step by step to see exactly how these geopolitical dominoes are falling and why a massive surge in nuclear proliferation is literally the most urgent threat we face today. To really grasp how serious things are getting right now, we actually need to rewind back to 1963. President John F. Kennedy admitted he was absolutely haunted by the dread that within a decade, the world could be completely overrun by 15, 20, or even 25 nuclear-armed states. He was dreading a chaotic, fractured world where every single nation felt they needed the ultimate weapon just to survive. Now, as we'll see, the international system built after the war largely kept that nightmare at bay, but the source material warns that the foundation of that system is cracking fast. And Kennedy's greatest fear? Well, it's rushing right back to the surface. So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the wrecking ball revolution, look at a breaking international system, and unpack the new security dilemma. Then, we'll shift to the nuclear proliferation threat, sprinting for the bomb, and finally, this unstable new order. All right, let's dive into part 1, the wrecking ball revolution. The source analysis details a profound shift in U.S. foreign policy. For decades, the post-war order was all about universalism. The idea that America would invest heavily in global institutions, build strong alliances, and rely on shared values to maintain a peaceful world. But that approach is being totally replaced by this wrecking ball revolution. It's a hard pivot toward a highly transactional, unilateral, and frankly extreme blood-and-soil nationalism. It's an exclusionary approach focused almost entirely on hard power and borders, rather than shared global values. The analysis points out that the very architects of the post-war order are essentially taking a sledgehammer to it. Instead of investing in global stability, the new playbook is all about extracting whatever value you can from a violent, zero-sum world. And you can bet the global reaction to that shift has been massive. When a global superpower suddenly demands more from its allies while providing way fewer guarantees, it triggers a severe backlash. Corey Shake from the American Enterprise Institute hits the nail on the head here. She warns that this predatory behavior inevitably activates antibodies against American power. If nations feel like they're being bullied rather than protected, those relationships turn deeply resentful really fast. And when that trust evaporates, global stability goes right out the window with it.
Which leads us right into part 2, a breaking international system.
So what actually happens to everyone else when the main global enforcer just walks away? Well, the panic out there is palpable. Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney summed it up perfectly for middle powers, saying, "If we're not at the table, we're on the menu." That quote just perfectly captures the absolute desperation among nations who are suddenly realizing they can't outsource their security anymore. They're completely exposed. Without a reliable hegemon to enforce the rules, middle powers are scrambling to form regional alliances just to survive the vacuum. This fractured reality triggers two wildly different reactions. On one side of the board, you have middle powers in a total frenzy of preparation. The EU is doubling its defense spending, and Asian democracies are rushing to build neighborhood defense networks. But on the flip side, this broken system actively rewards predator states. Without a guaranteed global enforcer, states like Russia can just invade neighbors and hide behind the very rules they trample on, while China can deliberately exploit global economic choke points. For states willing to break the old rules, this chaos is basically a ladder.
Let's look at part 3. The new security dilemma.
Because as the international system fractures, we enter this dangerous zero-sum game. The fundamental question driving global politics today is this. Without a guaranteed global enforcer, how do nations actually ensure their own survival? When a country looks around and realizes the old rules-based order isn't going to save them, a paranoid scramble for security begins. And here's the catch. When one nation arms itself, even if it's purely for defense, its neighbor sees a threat and arms itself in response. It's a vicious cycle that inevitably triggers intense, highly destabilizing regional arms races. To really see the sheer scale of this, just look at the timeline. We started with Kennedy's fear back in '63. But by 1994, under the strength of that old rules-based order, a country like Ukraine actually felt safe enough to give up the nuclear weapons they inherited from the Soviets. Their security was theoretically guaranteed by international norms. But fast forward to 2023, and the New START arms control treaty between the US and Russia just lapses. We are moving into an era with zero guardrails. And looking ahead to the 2030s, experts predict a massive proliferation of advanced, deep-strike conventional weapons. We are hurtling toward a heavily armed, highly volatile future where the old rules simply do not apply. And that perfectly sets the stage for our main focus today. Part 4, the nuclear proliferation threat. 9. That is the number of nuclear powers in the world today. Thanks to the post-war order and some really targeted non-proliferation efforts, Kennedy's nightmare of 25 nuclear states was successfully suppressed. But the authors of our source material warn that this incredible diplomatic achievement is rapidly collapsing. The dam is breaking. And here is exactly why the dam is breaking. It all comes down to the concept of the nuclear umbrella. For decades, non-nuclear nations didn't build their own bombs because they completely trusted that the US would protect them with its own arsenal if the absolute worst happened. But this wrecking ball revolution shatters that trust entirely. The text asks a really chilling question. If a superpower becomes entirely transactional and sneers at its closest allies, why on earth would it risk global nuclear annihilation on their behalf? As that absolute trust evaporates, countries that previously had zero nuclear ambitions are suddenly realizing they might have to seek peace through their own hideous strength. So how does a country actually go about getting that strength? Let's move to part 5. Sprinting for the bomb. In a highly surveilled modern world, you can't just slowly build a nuclear program out in the open. The source highlights a terrifying reality. The most dangerous time for a rogue nation is the window between when the world discovers they're building a bomb and when that bomb is actually functional. To minimize that super vulnerable window, countries prepare to sprint. Step 1, they secretly knock out the advanced design work ahead of time. Step 2, they stockpile civilian nuclear material that can be quickly repurposed. And Step 3, they use massive supercomputers like the ones quietly sitting in East Asian nuclear plants to covertly model and develop these systems. They line everything up so that when they finally make the call, the sprint to a functional weapon is simply too fast to be stopped. But even if a nation doesn't execute a full-blown nuclear sprint, the broader landscape is growing wildly unstable. The source details a bunch of compounding threats here. We're seeing Russia dangerously blur the lines between nuclear and non-nuclear warfare, frequently throwing around nuclear threats in conventional conflicts. At the same time, China is massively expanding its arsenal while completely stalling any arms control talks. Plus, by the early 2030s, we're going to see highly advanced deep-strike conventional weapons that can cause strategic devastation without even crossing the nuclear threshold. And finally, we might even see existing nuclear powers in Europe explicitly sharing their deterrence to cover neighbors who feel abandoned by the US. The whole architecture of global deterrence is literally shifting beneath our feet. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Let's look at part 6, an unstable new order. What kind of world rises from the rubble of this revolution? Well, the mathematical reality is pretty grim. The source quotes Paul von Hooft from Rand Europe, who puts it very bluntly. When you have multiple states aggressively arming themselves in a paranoid scramble for security, and you completely remove the old diplomatic norms, the baseline likelihood of war simply goes up. And as more of those states quietly acquire nuclear capabilities or these advanced steep strike weapons, the statistical probability of a conflict escalating to a nuclear weapon, even a limited tactical strike, increases drastically. We are rapidly moving from a world of enforced stability into a world of volatile probability. And that brings us to a quote from Joel Rosenthal that really sums this all up. Reviewing this massive shift, he notes, "It's a pretty dark picture. I don't really see a way out of it. I just see mitigation, not prevention. If the wrecking ball revolution has truly destroyed the universalist post-war order, we might have actually already crossed a point of no return. We're no longer in an era where we can wholly prevent a nuclear crisis. We're entering an era where we can only hope to mitigate one." Which leaves us with a truly terrifying question to consider. As these old alliances fracture and the race for ultimate security accelerates, how will the world survive the falling of these nuclear dominoes? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.